Let's add some assets to the platform. So I'm going to come over here to the right, click on New Asset, and now I'll see this window appear. If I click on Browse Files, I can select the assets that I want to upload. So we accept, as you can see, lots and lots of different file types. So we're going to select a few 3D assets. Let's select a couple of images and an Excel file. Click Open, and I'll see those assets listed here. You can also drag and drop if that's easier for you. Next, I can choose to add tags if I want to add tags to make them more easily searchable later on, or attributes. And then over here, if I added 3D models, I'm going to see optimization for 3D models here. This is something you're almost always going to want to do. We still preserve your original file, so you can always download that, but why not have a light version of the asset that looks the same that you can interact with on the web? So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to select my pipeline. And optimization pipelines are basically different settings that we have in the optimizer based on where the asset came from, because different 3D programs have different quirks. So what you're going to do is look for your 3D program, whether it's Browseware or Clo or Keyshot. But if you don't see it here, don't worry about it. We're updating this all the time. We'll be adding the search functionality. What you can do is just click Other, and that's a very safe pipeline to go with. We have more documentation on our resources section that kind of go into the details of what happens in each one of these pipelines. So next I'm going to come to advanced settings. By default, we have all of these on. The first setting that I'll see is geometry optimization. So one of the key features of VNTANA is our patented optimization algorithm. We can automatically reduce your 3D file sizes by up to 99% while still maintaining super high visual fidelity. So I'm going to want this on. I personally always leave it on, and in most cases you should leave it on. Next, I have this remove obstructed geometry. So remove obstructed geometry is exactly what it sounds like. We will remove any geometry that is not visual. So it's obstructed visually on the 3D asset. And this gives a really good example of what we mean. Here, there's an avatar. If the avatar was wearing the dress, we don't just get rid of a single mesh. We'll actually get rid of whatever polygons are not visible. And you can see that reflected right here. Next, I can set my polygon limit. And so this is the limit that we're going to try and hit when it comes to reducing the 3D file size. By default, we have 75,000 in. I see a lot of people put in 25,000 or 50,000. Usually we can hit that. One of the best parts about our intelligent optimization algorithm is that we will actually stop optimizing the asset when we feel it is no longer safe. So you're safe putting a low number in here and actually having the asset still look really good, because we will stop ourselves if we feel we're going to affect the visual fidelity of the asset. And that's where this forced polygon limit comes in. So let's say that you're trying to put this on a headset and they've got a hard polygon count of 100,000 or 75,000 or something like that. And we didn't hit it because we stopped decimating the asset. What forced polygon limit will do is it'll override some of those safeguards. So it's good to use it in cases where maybe you're at 75,000 and you need to be at 50,000 polys, or you're close but just not quite there. Then you can try force polygon limit, and we'll override some of our normal safeguards and try and force the asset to hit the polygon limit that you're going after. But most of the time you probably want to leave this off. Next, we have Draco compression, and we have tooltips for all of these that go into more detail. But Draco compression is a type of compression that basically just reduces the amount of file size that the geometry of your asset takes up in the overall 3D model. So let's say, for instance, that you had a 3D model that was 10 megabytes and 5 megabytes came from textures in the 3D model and 5 megabytes came from the actual geometry. What Draco compression will do is it'll reduce that 5 megabytes of geometry data down to probably about 1. So it's a really good free savings in terms of file size. It's excellent for lots of industrial assets and other super high poly assets and getting them nice and small. The limitation is that some platforms do not accept Draco compression. So if you have a Draco compressed asset, you may not be able to import that asset into a game engine, for instance. So if you plan on using the asset somewhere else, you may want to turn it off. If you're just putting it to embed on the web, absolutely leave it on. Next, we get into our texture settings. And so with our texture settings, there's a few different things to think about. The first thing we do when we're optimizing the textures of the asset is that we will clamp the maximum resolution of any given texture based on whatever you have in this box. So we've got unbounded, 4K, 2K, 1K, etc. Unbounded means we're just going to leave it as it is. Textures can be as big as you want. So this is not atlasing textures, so we're not going to force all your textures to fit into a 2K by 2K box, but it means that if you have an asset that's got, let's just say 3 textures, and one is 4K, one is 2K, and one is 1K, we're going to down-res that 4K texture to 2K, and then we may leave the 2K the same, and we may leave the 1K the same. But what our texture optimization is actually doing is trying to hit a target pixel density on the asset. And so target pixel density just means pixels per meter. So we're looking for a uniform target pixel density across the asset. So visual fidelity while using as few pixels as possible when texturing the asset. That's basically what's happening. Over here, you've got compression level. This is standard JPEG compression, or if it's transparent, it'll be a PNG compression. 3 is usually a very reasonable level to leave this on. And then we have bake ambient occlusion. So we actually have our own ambient occlusion baking algorithm, and you can actually control the settings. So ambient occlusion, you can think about it as kind of like the small global shadows that add a lot of realism to a 3D asset. A lot of programs don't export them natively because it can be really expensive computationally to calculate this, but you can add that in when you add an asset to VNTANA. With our new viewer, you'll also be able to use screen space ambient occlusion, which is just added from directly within our web viewer. But here you can change the strength, the radius, resolution, etc. And again, we offer tooltips here that give you a little bit more information about what's happening. Next, we have 3D model scaling. What you're able to do is, let's say that you uploaded an asset and it was in the wrong size. Maybe it was in centimeters and it should have been in meters. You can actually turn this on and set the size to exactly what you want it to be. And it'll scale on that axis, and relatively the X and the Z axes will scale as well, but you can choose whichever one you would like to scale on. Finally, we have pivot point of alignment. Most of the time, you shouldn't have to touch this, but certain platforms like Meta, for instance, they want to have your assets bottom centered, in which case we will realign the pivot point of your asset. Here I have the option to add my assets to a variant group, which I'm going to talk about in another video, and I can link them to a project if I want to. Again, you can create a new project or select some existing projects. Finally, I'm going to come up here and click Create, and I have 4 different options. I've got Draft, Live Internal, Live Public, and Send for Review. Again, I've covered the different statuses in a different video on the platform, but this Send for Review is new. This will just send it to someone who has permissions in my organization, let's say Erin, and she will get a notification that I have uploaded these assets, and it's up to her to approve them whether or not they look good. So this is one of our approval workflows that's built directly into the platform. Next, you'll see that this little note right here. So you don't want to close out the page. You're free to navigate to other pages from within the platform, but you just don't want to close out the VNTANA workspace while your assets are still being uploaded, but they're going to be uploading in the background, as you can see here. It usually takes 3 to 4 minutes, depending on the size of your 3D file, after it's been uploaded, to optimize the asset, and then you'll see the assets appear here, and you can click into any one of them.